thank you so much for all you do. It simply wouldn't work without you, and thank you for going on to inspire so many young people. To all the supporters here today, thank you.
On the 25th of March, 2026, inside Buckingham Palace, someone sat down and drafted a formal note that the people writing it desperately hoped would never need to exist. Not a press release, not a public announcement, a short, quiet, controlled piece of paper. And when it arrived at Bagshot Park, it confirmed the one thing the British monarchy had spent years trying to avoid putting in writing. Prince Edward had won, not held his ground, not survived a family argument with his dignity intact. He had forced the crown, the institution that defines British identity, that projects authority across the world, that has built its entire survival strategy on never admitting error, to back down completely. In writing, on the record, forever. Here is the loop I want you to hold in your head for the next stretch, because I am going to pay it off in full before we finish. How does a man who spent decades being dismissed as the quiet one, the least notable Windsor, the prince nobody in the press ever bothered to worry about, build a legal case so airtight that King Charles III's own lawyers could not find a single crack in it? Because that is exactly what happened. His own lawyers, not Edward's. Charles paid for the opinion that ended him. And the answer takes us all the way back to a dying prince, a queen who knew her time was running out, and documents signed in the shadow of grief that nobody inside that palace expected would ever matter this much. Stay with me, because what unfolded on the 25th of March did not just shake the royal family, it rewrote the rules about what a king can actually do. I want to start with the promise, the thing that made all of this possible. To understand why that date landed the way it did, you have to go back to who Queen Elizabeth II was in her final years. Not the ceremonial figure, not the composed woman standing on the balcony at Trooping the Color with the wind catching her hat. I mean the private Elizabeth, the mother, the woman who had watched her own family fracture in public, repeatedly, painfully, and who spent the last chapter of her life trying to make sure the damage stopped with her. By 2021, she had already lost too much. Andrew had become radioactive, not difficult, not embarrassing, radioactive. There is a difference, and everyone inside those walls understood it. Harry had walked, simply walked, and taken the oxygen of the entire institution with him. And the tabloids were running daily updates on whatever fresh Windsor disaster had just crawled into the light. Through all of it, one son had stayed clean. One son had shown up, done the work, kept his head down, and never once handed the press a headline they could sharpen into a weapon. Edward. So when Elizabeth began making her final decisions, the ones designed to outlast her, the ones she knew she would not be around to defend, Edward was the son she thought about most carefully. And here is where you need to understand something about what a title actually is inside that family. The Duke of Edinburgh title had been Prince Philip's identity for more than 70 years. It was not an honor. It was not a decoration pinned to a man's chest at a ceremony. It was the shape of his entire life's work, his contribution, his legacy, compressed into a name that could be spoken in a single breath. And Elizabeth knew, with the certainty of a woman who had spent a lifetime watching men fight over far lesser things, that without proper protection, that title could be stripped, reassigned, or quietly diminished the moment she was no longer standing between it and the people who wanted it. So she made a decision. And here is the part that changes everything. She did not just make it verbally. She did not say it at a dinner and trust that people would remember. She documented it. The title would go to Edward, and it would go with teeth. That promise became real in April 2023, when King Charles III officially conferred the Dukedom of Edinburgh on his youngest brother. On camera, it looked like a smooth, dignified transition, a family honoring its own history, warm handshakes, careful smiles. What the cameras did not show was the second half of that inheritance. The part that arrived without a ceremony, the part that arrived as paperwork, because tied to that title was a property, and that property was about to become the single most contested piece of real estate in the entire British monarchy. So let me ask you something before we walk into that house. If someone handed you the keys to a crumbling 120-room mansion, told you the rent was £5,000 a year, and then explained the catch, that you had to fund the repairs yourself immediately and bring the whole thing back to a standard fit for royal use, would you take that deal? Most people would not. Most people would look at that arrangement and see a trap dressed up as a gift. In March 1998, that was exactly the arrangement placed in front of Prince Edward. He said yes. Now, Bagshot Park is not just a house. Let me put you inside it. It sits on 51 acres inside Windsor Great Park. It is a Tudor Gothic mansion with the kind of presence that makes people slow their cars down when they drive past, the sort of building that seems to be watching you back. It is the seat of the Dukedom of Edinburgh. By any reasonable measure, it is one of the great royal properties in England. And in 1998, it was a disaster. The building had been abandoned. It had served as an army chaplain's residence before Edward arrived, and then it had simply been left to deteriorate while the Crown Estate quietly explored other options. And those options documented at the time included turning the entire property into a hotel or a conference center. Sit with that, the seat of the Dukedom of Edinburgh, the home tied to Prince Philip's own name, and the institution was pricing it out as a venue. That is how little they valued it. Not enough to maintain it, not enough to invest in it, just enough to hand it off and collect whatever rent they could squeeze out of whoever was willing to take the burden. Edward took it. And then he did something that, looking back from where we are now, looks less like generosity and more like foresight. He spent £1.36 million of his own money on it, private funds, money he had earned himself. Before stepping into full-time royal duties, he poured it into that building. Total restoration costs reached nearly £3 million. The Crown Estate contributed their share, yes, but Edward carried a serious financial burden that the institution he was serving was under no obligation to cover. When the work was finished, his rent was reassessed at £90,000 per year. The National Audit Office confirmed that as fair market value, and he paid it every year, without complaint, without negotiation, without hunting for a clever way around it. Now hold that image in your mind, because here is where the real story starts to show its teeth. While Edward was paying market rate and funding his own restoration work out of his own pocket, his brother Andrew was sitting at Royal Lodge under completely different terms. The National Audit Office documented it clearly. One prince followed the rules, the other did not. And the institution that let that double standard sit there undisturbed for years was about to turn its full attention toward the one who had done everything right. That is not irony, that is a pattern. And I want you to remember it because it explains something important about how these places actually work. Institutions do not chase the people who fight them. They chase the people who comply. Compliance looks like weakness from the inside. Except Edward had gone further than anyone had realized. In 2007, he paid £5 million through his company, Eclipse Nominees Limited, to extend his lease to 150 years. Read that again, 150 years. Not a short-term arrangement, not a tentative foothold, a generational commitment. He locked himself into that property for his life and well beyond it. He built himself the right to sell the lease and retain the profit. He created a kind of control that no royal decree could easily unwind. By 2026, that property was worth approximately £30 million. And suddenly, the modernization agenda being pushed from inside Buckingham Palace had a very clear financial motive attached to it. Here is the part most people watching from the outside could not see while it was happening. Charles came to the throne in September 2022 with a vision, a slimmed-down monarchy, fewer working royals, tighter finances, more central control over how the institution projected itself into the world. Those were the stated goals. Reasonable on the surface, sensible, even. if you accept the premise that the monarchy needs to modernize in order to survive. But a stated goal and the actual mechanics of achieving it are two entirely different animals. By 2026, those mechanics had started to look less like reform and more like consolidation. Royal leases were under review, financial audits were running behind closed doors. Quiet pressure was being applied to how members of the family lived, what they held, and what they owed the central institution for the privilege of holding it. Bagshot Park became a target, and when it did, the people applying that pressure ran into something they clearly had not anticipated. They ran into a man who had been preparing for exactly this moment since 1998. Because Queen Elizabeth II, in her final years, had done something that Prince Philip pushed her to do. She had written a letter of intent, a document tying Bagshot Park directly to the Edinburgh title for Edward's lifetime. And that document was witnessed by Prince Philip himself. As he was dying, stop and picture that room. A man in the final weeks of his life, everything he had built beginning to shift and loosen around him, and he takes the time, spends some of the very little he has left, to put his name on a piece of paper designed to protect his youngest son from an institution he knew perfectly well could be quietly ruthless when it chose to be. Philip had spent more than 70 years inside the machinery of the British monarchy. He had watched it move against people it no longer found useful. He knew how the quiet pressure worked. He knew that you never need to break the rules to break a person. You just make their position unstable, their support uncertain, their home insecure, and then you wait. He was not going to let that happen to Edward. So he signed the letter, and Edward kept it, kept the original lease, kept every financial record, every repair, every payment, every audit. 20 years of documentation, sitting quietly in a file that nobody inside the palace had any idea existed. Here is my read, and this is where I break from every other version of this story you will hear. Everyone frames Edward as the accidental winner, the quiet one who happened to have his paperwork in order. I do not believe that for a second. You do not extend a lease to 150 years by accident. You do not keep 20 years of receipts on a house you love because you enjoy filing. Edward was not lucky. Edward was watching. He had seen what the institution did to the others, and he built the wall long before anyone thought to come at him. But it did not start with the property. It started with something smaller, something far more personal, and in many ways, something that revealed exactly what was really driving all of this. Earlier in 2026, before the lawyers arrived with their dossier, a palace official turned up at the Edinburgh household. The visit was framed as routine, a jewelry audit, a national heritage review, standard procedure. That is how it was described. What it actually was, once you strip away the careful language, was someone arriving with a clipboard to question jewelry that Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, had worn as her own for 25 years. And at the center of that audit was one piece, the Anthemian tiara. This was not some random item pulled from a shared royal vault. It was made specifically for Sophie's wedding in 1999, commissioned by Queen Elizabeth II herself. Built using 4 antique elements shaped into a honeysuckle design taken from the private collection of Queen Victoria, it was Elizabeth's personal gift to the woman her youngest son was marrying. For nearly 2 decades, it was the only tiara Sophie regularly wore. And that detail matters more than it looks like it should. Sophie was never granted the kind of open access to the grand state tiaras that other senior royals enjoyed. That was understood within the family. Never announced, never formally stated, but absolutely clear to everyone standing in the room. The Anthemian tiara was her crown, the one piece that was entirely, unambiguously hers. And now it was being questioned. The argument coming from the palace was legal in its framing. Because the tiara contained stones from Queen Victoria's era, it could potentially be reclassified as crown property. That would mean moving it into the central royal vault and requiring Sophie to request permission each time she wanted to wear it. Her own wedding tiara, a gift from the woman who was as close to a mother as she had ever known, requiring permission. But here's the thread you need to pull, and it is the thread that unraveled the whole thing. If that argument holds, if a personal gift from the monarch can be reclassified as crown property based on its historical components, then where exactly does it stop? Every piece of jewelry Elizabeth gave away across a 70-year reign becomes vulnerable. Every personal gift becomes subject to review. And Queen Camilla's own collection, which came substantially from royal sources, falls directly into the same trap. The logic of that argument devoured itself. Edward's legal team saw it immediately, and they were not going to be polite about it. They were not going to gently point out the contradiction over tea and let everyone save face. They were going to shut it down completely. They produced a deed of gift, signed by Elizabeth in 1999. It classified the Anthemian tiara explicitly as a private wedding present, not a state loan, not a shared asset, not held in trust. It belonged to Sophie, full stop. But Edward had gone further, and this is the detail that I find genuinely delicious. In 1999, he had worked with royal jewelers to create a matching set of pearl jewelry for Sophie, a necklace and earrings, designed to complement the Anthemian tiara exactly. The materials were funded through the crown, but Edward held the design rights personally. His lawyers argued that the tiara and the pearl set constituted a single artistic unit tied to his own design work. Remove the tiara and you fracture that unit. And that gave him a legal dimension nobody had anticipated. Not property law, not inheritance, design, authorship, the argument an artist makes, deployed inside a palace. There was something else in that file too. Something that had nothing to do with law and everything to do with truth. In October 2019, at a reception in Buckingham Palace marking the work of the Queen Elizabeth Diamond Jubilee Trust, Sophie was giving a speech. In the middle of it, in front of senior royals and assembled guests, she turned to look at Queen Elizabeth II and said, without planning it, without thinking, "Mama." It slipped out. In a room where every word is controlled, where every gesture is calculated 3 moves ahead, where nothing, absolutely nothing is accidental. It slipped out. And it said everything about who those 2 women were to each other. The woman who signed that deed of gift was the woman Sophie called her mother. And now another woman was trying to use legal language to take that away. By the afternoon of the 25th of March, Edward's lawyers delivered a direct warning. If the claim on the tiara was not dropped by end of day, they would release private letters written by Elizabeth. Letters that stated, clearly and personally, her wish for Sophie to retain full ownership of her jewelry. And according to those close to the situation, those letters did not stop at the tiara. They included words about Camilla. Now think about what that actually threatens. Charles had spent years rehabilitating Camilla's image, turning her from one of the most unpopular figures in British public life into queen consort. That was not luck. That was a long, careful, difficult, expensive process measured in decades. Elizabeth's documented feelings about Camilla, the long years of cold distance, the tension that never fully dissolved, the reluctant acceptance that arrived only near the very end. Those were things Charles had worked hard to leave in the past. Those letters could drag every bit of it back into the present in a single afternoon. And that is where the fight was sitting when Princess Anne walked into a private room inside Buckingham Palace. This is the moment everything changes. Up to this point, the fight had been legal. Documents against documents, lawyers against lawyers, paper against paper, cold, slow, procedural. Then Anne walked in. To understand why that mattered, you have to understand that Anne and Sophie were not always close. As recently as 2021, the distance between them was visible to anyone paying attention. Anne does not perform warmth. She never has. If she does not feel it, she does not show it. That has been her entire public life, and honestly, it is the most consistent thing about her. But April 2021 changed the structure inside that family. Philip died. And in the grief that followed, both Anne and Sophie stepped forward to support Queen Elizabeth II. Through her final year, they began seeing each other almost daily. The distance between them closed slowly, and then completely. By the time of Elizabeth's funeral in September 2022, the change was there for anyone watching closely enough. As they stood waiting for the coffin, Sophie reached out and placed a quiet hand on Anne's back. A small gesture, barely visible, real. And in a family that runs entirely on controlled appearances, a real gesture carries enormous weight. By March 2026, that quiet connection had become something protective and something ready to move. So when Anne walked into that meeting with King Charles III, she was not there as a sister trying to mediate. She was not there to smooth anything over. She was there as a woman who had read every document in Edward's file and decided that what was happening was wrong. She went straight at it. She told Charles that if he allowed this to continue, if he allowed private gifts from their mother to be questioned, reclassified, or retrieved, then the word of a monarch meant nothing. And then she said the thing that stopped the room. If our mother's signature on a lease or a deed of gift is not worth the paper it is written on today, then your signature will be worth even less tomorrow. That is not diplomacy. That is not a sister smoothing feathers. That is a direct strike at the foundation of royal authority itself. Here is the connection I want you to make, because it is bigger than this family, and it explains why that one sentence landed like a hammer. A king's power rests entirely on trust. The trust that what he signs will be honored. And that trust does not begin with him. It flows backward through every monarch before him. It works exactly like currency. A banknote is a piece of paper with no intrinsic value whatsoever. It works because a chain of institutions has honored every note that came before it. The moment one issuer refuses to honor the notes their predecessor signed, every note in circulation, including the ones they printed this morning, becomes suspect. You do not devalue the old money. You devalue all of it, instantly. That is what Anne was telling her brother. Break the chain, and you do not just dishonor your mother. You debase your own signature. Anne had also reviewed the Bagshot Park documents personally. She knew what Edward had paid. She knew what terms the Crown estate had accepted. She knew exactly what a 150-year lease means in legal terms. And she made her position plain. Edward paid for that home. The Crown estate accepted his money under those terms. That agreement stands. There is nothing left to argue. She refused to treat the tiara and the house as separate disputes. She made it explicit. They were the same fight. Both were personal gifts from Elizabeth, both backed by signed legal documents, both now being challenged using identical logic. If they take one, the door opens for the other, and once that door opens, nothing their mother ever signed is safe. Then she went further. She told Charles that if the pressure continued, and specifically if Camilla's office kept pushing, she would act, not privately, publicly. She would oversee a full audit of the Queen's household, not a surface-level review of the headline numbers. Everything, expenses, staffing, allocations connected directly to Queen Camilla. And that threat was not empty. Anne is the one person in that family with the credibility to make it real. She has a decades-long record of financial discipline and public accountability. If Anne says she will expose something, people believe her. The press believes her. The public believes her. She has never once been caught inside a manufactured story or a polished deception. That is her actual power, and almost nobody talks about it. Not her title, not her place in the line, her record. She also addressed Edward's children directly. There had been quiet pressure building to push James, Earl of Wessex, and Lady Louise Windsor into full private status earlier than their parents, or they themselves had decided. That would mean stepping away from protected royal positioning and losing the security that comes with it. Anne shut it down immediately. Now, this is the part I find most revealing about her, because she had chosen a private life for her own children, Peter and Zara, years ago. She of all people could have said, I did it, they can do it. But that was her choice, made freely, without institutional pressure, without anyone else deciding her timeline for her. What she was watching now was something else entirely. External pressure applied to children who had not made that choice for themselves. She was not going to stand there and watch it happen. By the time she walked out of that room, Charles had no clean options left. Back Camilla and risk destroying the credibility of his own authority, or step back and accept that some things his mother decided are simply beyond his reach. There was no good version of either choice. And then came the verdict, not from Edward's side, from his own. After Anne's meeting, after the dossier had been reviewed in full, King Charles III's own legal team delivered their conclusion. Prince Edward's position was virtually unbreakable. Every document held, the original lease, the financial records, the letter of intent witnessed by Philip, the deed of gift for the tiara. 20 years of maintenance records showing the crown had actively benefited from Edward's stewardship of the estate. Every single piece of that file stood up under scrutiny. Not most of it, all of it. And then came the detail that reportedly hit Charles hardest of all. He had always known his mother protected Edward and Sophie. He understood where her loyalty sat within the private dynamics of the family. That was never a secret to him. What he had not known was that Philip, in the final stage of his life, had formally backed that protection in writing. He did not know about the witness letter, and that changed the entire character of what he was looking at. Because it was not Elizabeth acting alone to shelter her youngest son. It was both of them, together, in the final chapter of their lives, making sure that what they had built for Edward and Sophie would survive them both. Charles had believed since conferring the dukedom in April 2023 that he retained some residual authority over what came with it. That as the king who granted the title, he still held a degree of control over its context and its surroundings. His own lawyers told him in writing that he did not. What his mother gave Edward was not temporary. It was not conditional. It was not subject to royal review or modernization agendas. It was a legal inheritance, properly documented, witnessed by two of the most senior members of the monarchy, and entirely permanently out of his reach. So, when the law failed him, Charles stepped outside it. He wrote a private note, handwritten, sent directly to Bagshot Park, not through lawyers, not through palace channels. A personal message asking for a family meeting. Think about what that actually means. This is a sitting monarch, a king who can command rooms, direct institutions, and shape the narrative of an entire nation. Writing a note by hand to his younger brother, asking if they can talk, because the formal channels had failed him completely. And the response he got made the whole situation clear. Edward would not meet without his full legal team present. That single response changed everything that followed, because it told Charles, and everyone watching inside the palace, that this was no longer a family disagreement. It was no longer the kind of thing that gets smoothed over at a private dinner or buried in the comfortable silence of Windsor protocol. Edward was no longer operating as the younger brother trying to keep the peace. He was operating as a man who understood precisely what was at risk and refused to surrender any part of it without documentation and protection. And once a line like that is drawn in a family like this one, it does not get undrawn. Not with an apology, not with a Christmas at Sandringham, not ever. Here is what the public could not see while all of this was resolving. Sides were forming. Staff members who had worked around Sophie and Edward for years began showing quiet support for the Edinburgh household. Resentment toward the Queen's office started spreading through palace corridors that had always been defined by careful, enforced, absolute silence. And where there are sides, there are leaks. Private discussions that should have stayed contained began drifting toward the outside. Documents, internal notes, the shape of thinking that was supposed to stay within Buckingham Palace walls. All of it sitting closer to exposure than it had ever been. The palace that built its entire identity on control was no longer controlling its own house. One insider, according to reports from those close to the situation, put it with devastating simplicity. The king is being led into a minefield. He is being pushed to choose between his wife's demands and his mother's final decisions. There is no outcome that does not damage the family. That is not a political problem. That is not an image management challenge you fix with a well-placed briefing and a warm photograph. That is a structural fracture. And structural fractures in institutions like the British monarchy never announce themselves. They spread quietly, invisibly, behind the plaster. And by the time anyone can see the damage clearly, the repair work is already impossible. There was also the public dimension, and that dimension was brutal. Picture it landing. Ordinary people across Britain doing the daily arithmetic of making ends meet, rising costs, real financial pressure, and into that, the image of a king trying to reclaim a home from his brother. A home that brother had personally funded, personally restored, personally maintained for nearly 3 decades. If that image had fully broken into public view, it would not have landed well. It would not have been forgiven quickly. The monarchy's survival has always depended on one skill above all others: reading the public mood. And the public mood in 2026 had absolutely no appetite for watching a king strip assets from the one prince who had actually paid his own way. Which brings us to the note. Late on the 25th of March, 2026, a formal note was sent from the office of the Master of the Jewel House to Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh. It was short, direct, no emotion, no explanation, no acknowledgement whatsoever of what had led to that moment. The Anthemion tiara would remain under her exclusive private control. That was it. That was the whole thing. At the same time, the review of Bagshot Park was shut down. The official language described it as recognition of the Edinburgh household's role in maintaining the estate. Clean, neutral, engineered to give everyone a way to walk forward without a single person having to say the word defeat out loud. But inside the palace, nobody misunderstood what had happened. The crown had stepped back. Everything Prince Edward held was confirmed. The title, the home, the tiara. All of it standing exactly where Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip had placed it, backed by documents that survived every attempt to challenge them. And here is why that matters far beyond the immediate outcome, and this is the thing I keep coming back to. That formal note will sit in the archives long after every person involved in this story is gone. It will be read. Not maybe, will be. Some researcher, decades from now, will pull that file. And what will be clear, permanently, unavoidably, is this. A claim was made, it failed, and the institution was forced to admit that failure in writing. Now let me tell you what it cost, because the outcome was clean, and the aftermath absolutely was not. The relationship between King Charles III and Prince Edward has been permanently altered, not visibly, not in any way the public will get to see. They will continue appearing at the same events, standing in the same photographs, performing the unity the monarchy requires of them. But inside that family, everyone knows what happened. They know that one brother had to go to lawyers to protect himself from the other. They know that the institution which raised them both, shaped them both, defined them both, became the weapon in that fight. That knowledge does not evaporate. It does not get smoothed over by a handshake at a state occasion. It becomes part of the architecture of every single interaction that follows. 2 centers of power now exist inside the reduced Windsor structure. At Buckingham Palace, Charles and Camilla continue pressing their vision of a centralized, controlled, modernized monarchy. And away from that center, a different formation has emerged. Princess Anne, Prince Edward, Sophie. And, according to those monitoring the family's internal dynamics, quietly supported by Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, they are not organizing loudly, they are not issuing statements, they are holding a line, protecting what was built before, refusing to let it be rewritten by people who were not in the room when it was built. That divide is fixed now. It is not going to close. And for James, Earl of Wessex, and Lady Louise Windsor, both watching their father fight this from close distance, the lesson stays with them for life. They watched him win without drama, without public appeals, without ever once using the press as a weapon, which, in this family, makes him close to unique. He built his case over years. He kept every document. He trusted the law over the institution. And when the moment finally came, he was ready. One day, James will carry the Duke of Edinburgh title, the same title his grandfather spent more than 70 years defining. But he will carry it with a knowledge no previous holder ever had. He will know that the institution capable of giving can also try to take back. He will know that preparation is protection. He will know that sentiment means nothing without signatures. And that knowledge will make him cautious in a way that changes everything about how he operates inside that system for the rest of his life. Now, let me close every loop I opened, in order, exactly as I promised. I asked you how a man dismissed as the quiet one built a case that King Charles III's own lawyers could not crack. Here is the answer, complete. He did it in 1998 by taking a deal nobody else wanted and paying £1.36 million of his own money to make a ruin livable. He did it in 1999 by commissioning a pearl set that turned a tiara into an artistic unit with his own name attached to the design. He did it in 2007 by spending £5 million to lock a 150-year lease into place through Eclipse Nominees Limited. And he did it by keeping every receipt, every audit, every scrap of paper for 20 years while everyone around him assumed he was simply being dull. He was not being dull. He was building the wall. I told you the answer went back to a dying prince and a queen running out of time. It does. Prince Philip, in the final weeks of his life, witnessed a letter of intent tying Bagshot Park to the Edinburgh title. Queen Elizabeth II signed a deed of gift in 1999, classifying the Enthemion tiara as a private wedding present. Neither of those documents was sentimental. Both were structural, both held. And I told you this rewrote the rules about what a king can actually do. It did. Charles has his monarchy. He has his structure. He has all the authority the crown confers. What he no longer has is the unchallenged belief that he controls everything inside it. His mother built the protections, his father witnessed them, his youngest brother spent 28 years quietly, methodically making them legally unassailable. And when the institution finally turned its machinery toward the one Windsor who had done everything right, it hit a wall. It could not move. The palace had to put it in writing. A king forced to admit in formal documentation that his mother's final decisions are beyond his reach. That says more about the actual limits of royal power than anything that has happened inside that family in decades. Queen Elizabeth II is gone, but on the 25th of March, 2026, her decisions won. Prince Philip is gone, but the document he signed as he was dying held. It held against lawyers, it held against palace pressure, it held against the king himself. And in a 120-room Tudor Gothic mansion, sitting on 51 acres in Surrey, a man who waited his entire life to inherit his father's name, a man the press never took seriously enough, a man the institution never feared enough, went to sleep that night with his home, his title, and his wife's tiara exactly where they had always been. Exactly where his mother put them. If you have been watching this family for any length of time, you already know the truth of it. What happens quietly inside those walls matters infinitely more than anything announced on the palace steps. Everything that gets said out loud is theater. The real monarchy runs on paper. And if you take one thing from all of this, take that. Not the drama, not the tiara, not the handwritten note from a king who had run out of other options. Take the boring part. The filing, the receipts. The 20 years of a man keeping records on a house because he understood something the rest of them never bothered to learn. Titles can be conferred and titles can be diminished. Affection curdles. Loyalty inside that family has an expiry date nobody prints on the box. But a signature, properly witnessed, properly documented, sitting in a file somewhere that a lawyer can produce on demand that outlives everyone who signed it. Elizabeth knew it. Philip knew it well enough to spend some of the last strength he had on a witness line. And Edward, the quiet one, the least notable Windsor, the prince nobody worried about, knew it for 28 years while everybody around him mistook his silence for having nothing to say. And this story is nowhere near finished. Because two centers of power now exist inside that family, and neither one of them is going anywhere. What comes next is going to be even harder to look away from.